Gettysburg by Martin Wallace. This is not a new game. It is a game that I acquired a couple of years ago, but for some reason this game has been sitting on my game shelves until now, almost. I don't know why it got overlooked. Well, there are just so many things that happen in life and so many games to play. I kind of forgot that I had it, but finally I got a chance to play the game. And this is a game by Martin Wallace, and I played other games by Martin Wallace in the past. In particular, I played A Few Acres of Snow, which is a war game that uses Eurogamey type of mechanics, but yet, magically, I would say, it still manages to give you a depiction of a war game, a war event that, as you play it, gives you the sense that you're playing a war game. To me, this is the most scientific definition you can have of a war game. A game that, when you play it, it feels like you're playing a war game. That is how I define a war game. Gettysburg, as I started learning the rules and looking at the components, made me scratch my head a little bit because I wasn't sure what this was going to be. Clearly, the theme is a thing that you find usually in war games. You have one of the most iconic battles of Western history. You look at the map and you see a map of the area surrounding Gettysburg, as you should expect from a game with this title. And yet the components are cute little meeples. The rulebook is very short. The mechanics, as you learn about them, feel pretty abstract, and it's unclear whether or not there's going to be a connection with the theme and a connection that is meaningful and makes sense, or is it just there for the sake of it. So I learned the game, I played it to try to figure out, is this a war game, a Euro game in disguise, a little bit of both? Well, let's take a closer look and then we'll try to answer that question. This is the board of the game. As you can see, it is divided in areas. These areas may be crossed by roads, and the only effect that roads have on movement is to increase the number of units that can move across a border during an impulse. Otherwise, there are no terrain features that affect movement. Another important terrain feature, however, is represented by hills, indicated by these triangles, and ridges, indicated by these yellow symbols here. These are areas that affect various functions of combat. For example, they affect the range of long-range artillery, they affect uphill charges, as they all should, they block line of sight for artillery, this kind of thing. In the game, the combat units that you will use are represented by wooden pieces. For all intents and purposes, this is military meeples. And these wooden units may represent artillery, like in this case, or infantry, like you have here. The different colors on the infantry pieces indicate different levels of quality. These are 3 Union pieces. There are 3 types of infantry pieces that you have for the Union, and they're respectively normal infantry, elite infantry, and low quality infantry. The Union also has 2 cavalry units. It doesn't look like there is a horse in there, which makes sense because in this game cavalry is represented mainly as mounted infantry. It attacks just like infantry does. All it does is to have an advantage when it comes to movement. So pretty unusual to see meeples in a war game, but who knows, maybe that's not such a bad thing as long as the meeples get the job done. I think that they look good and nice. However, the heart of the game really relies on these other wooden components here, which are command cubes. Command cubes represent areas of particular interest for your commanders. They mark areas in which and around which you will be able to issue your orders. When it is your turn, you can do one of 3 things. You can take one of your command cubes and place it in an area on the board, as long as it does not contain enemy units or other command cubes of yours. It is okay if there are no units of yours in there. So in a turn, you can choose to place a cube, or remove a cube. If you choose to do so, then you place the cube in an area on the side where you will place all the cubes that you have removed from the board. You start with a pool of 8 command cubes, 2 per value, from 2 to 3, so 2 2s, 2 3s, 4 and 5s. And as I said, you place them on the board. Then after you use them, you spend impulses to remove them, and you need to have them place them all and remove them all before you can get any back. So you have to cycle through all of your cubes before you can get your pool of command cubes ready again. But why are you placing the command cubes there? Well, that's very important because you need them to issue orders, and orders are represented by these command disks. Command disks, there is a fixed number of command disks that you can use in each period of the game. The game is divided in mornings, midday, afternoon, and night, and there are boxes for each period in which you place the disks that you need to use for that area, for that period, and there is a number that indicates here the exact number of discs that you get. For example, the Union gets 10 for the morning and 8 for midday, and so on and so forth. When it is your turn, instead of placing a cube or removing a cube, you can take a disc from your stock of available discs and place it on the board by a command cube, as long as the total number of discs that you have by that command cube does not exceed the number printed here. So if I have a cube with a number 3 here, I can add a disc, I can add 2, later one per impulse, later I can add another one, but now the disc that cube is completely useless for me. I cannot do anything with it because I cannot add more orders around it. I need to spend an impulse to remove it, and then I also get the discs out of there. And when you add a disk to an area that contains a command cube that can still allow for new disks to be placed there, then in that impulse you can issue an order to units that are in that area and or in areas adjacent to that cube, to the now active command cube. So each impulse you place a cube, or you remove a cube, or you add a disk and you execute an order. Important enough, the cubes will be facing the owner so that the opponent knows where your orders are going to go, but not what your capability to issue order in a certain area is going to be. Now, what are these orders? Very important. A possible and very common order, probably the most common order in the game, is to move and to assault. Basically, you move, and if your movement ends with some of your units being in an area that contains enemy units, then you also resolve combat. But this type of combat, assault, is a function of movement. So you issue an order starting from your disk, and you can move units from one area to another. The standard movement allowance is 1 area, with the exception of cavalry that can move up to 2. And the area limit, the maximum number of units that you can have in an area after movement, is of 4. That is the maximum, let's call it stacking. I'll talk about resolution of assault later because it's a little more complicated. First, I want to go through all of the possible options that you have for your actions. Another action that you can take when you place a command disk in an area, let's do it like this, is to use your artillery to perform fire artillery. Then you may fire to units, you may give orders to artillery units that are in 1 or 2 different areas, and you can have them fire independently, or you can have them fire at the same target. You just need to decide which targets they're going to fire. The distance that they will be able to fire to depends on the elevation at which they are. Artillery units that are on hills or on ridges can fire at longer distances than otherwise. To resolve a fire artillery is pretty simple. You look at this table here on the player aid. Unfortunately, there's only 1 player aid in the game. Super simple. You roll a die. You may modify if the target is entrenched, and there is a procedure that allows the players to build entrenchment using these wooden pieces here. So if the target is hidden behind entrenchments, there's a -1. -1 also if the fire is damaged. Here you have the result based on the result of your die roll, which may be nothing happens, or the opponent takes a cube of damage. I have the blue cubes out here, so I'll place them there. Cubes of damages are used to keep track of the damage of your units. Sometimes you will be able during the game to shift them from one unit to the other to indicate internal reorganization. But the point is that when a certain amount of cubes is assigned to a unit, the unit is destroyed. An infantry unit can take up to 5 damage cubes, the 6th one destroys it. Cavalry can take up to 3, the 4th one destroys it. Artillery doesn't take cubes, but it is only in one or two states. Undamaged, like here, or damage, and you place it on the side. If a damaged artillery unit takes another hit, then the unit is removed. So these are the possible results. Nothing, cube of damage to the targeted unit, or disruption. Disruption, you place a cube by the unit that received in the area that received the disruption, and there will be negative effects, of course, for units that are in the disrupted area. Which means it's a good chain or sequence of events to disrupt your opponent using artillery to cause some disruption, and then to follow that immediately with an infantry assault, because enemy units that are disrupted are particularly vulnerable to enemy assaults. Back to the list of options of things that you can do. So we talked about move and assault, fire, artillery. You can reinforce, just allows you to move a damage cube from an area to another area containing an infantry unit of the same color. So I could do this like this. In many cases, you can do it for free within the same area. For example, when you're moving out of an area, or when an opponent is attacking you, then you can reassign your cubes before you resolve combat. But to move cubes of damage from one area to another, you need a specific order. You may reorganize, which allows you to remove a disruption marker from an area, like you would have there. You can pass, which is to do nothing, you still spend the order disk. Forced pass. Now there are tricky things here regarding the way in which the disks work. After you remove the disks, they go on a side, they do not go back to a pool of available disks yet, and sometimes a turn will end with the Union not having enough pieces that have been removed from the board, not enough disks, to then put them back in their area of available disks, and to have all of the disks available for that period. It sounds complicated, but it simply means, for example, during the afternoon period, the Union will have 10 ordered disks. But maybe the Union was able to retrieve only 8 of their cubes from the board by removing cubes. Now those 8 go here, and they can be used as regular orders, they are regular orders, but the remaining amount of disks that is necessary to reach that number there is taken from a pool of black disks, and they work as replacements, which means the box for the orders may look like this. The player spends disks normally, but at some point the Union player will have to spend these disks, which count as spent orders, but they're simply useless, pointless. They do nothing for you. It's simply a forced pass. And that's a tricky thing for the Union. The Union player has to time things well and to chain actions well to be able to find the right moments to force pass without receiving too much damage from the opponent, without giving too much damage to the opponent. And also the Union player has to figure out when it is the right time to end the turn, so that the Union player has collected enough of these disks from the board to be able to actually do something, to have enough disks for the next period. So there's the force pass, and another possible action is to build an entrenchment. It actually takes 2 actions to build an entrenchment. You place an entrenchment little stick with 1 action, a second one with a second action, and only when you have the second one is the entrenchment completed. And that gives you defensive benefits if you're attacked through the side, through the edge of your area where you place the entrenchment. Also, another thing that I didn't mention before is that you place a smoke marker by your artillery when you use it for long-range attacks. And another action that you can take when you're placing one of your cubes is to remove the smoke counter. all that the smoke counter does is that it allows artillery units of the enemy to target your units. They need to have that to be able to target you. Before we talk about the combat, since we're still here in the general area, what I wanted to say is that the game continues in the way that I mentioned to you. You add the cubes and then you also add discs to resolve the orders. You cycle through discs and cubes for 4 periods a day for 3 days. So the total game is 12 turns, during which you have this back and forth of cubes and orders and resolution of orders and combat. At the end of the 3rd day, victory is decided based on control of victory areas, which are these areas indicated with these stars here. And these are areas that the Confederate player is trying to control and the Union player is trying to defend. Based on how well the Union defended or how well the Confederate player attacked, then is how you determine victory. With 2 of these areas, under control of the Confederate player wins. Otherwise, the Union player wins, unless there is an area that counts for double points. It's like 2 stars. And control of this area, this single area, by the Confederate player gives victory to the Confederate player. Resolution of assault, I said that I would save that for last, and so I did. There are possibly 5 steps in the resolution of the assault, which makes it sound extremely complicated and fiddly, but actually you may not have to go through all the steps every time, and in any case combat clicks pretty easily, will form a coherent picture in your mind after the first time or 2 that you perform it. The 5 steps. The first is, if there is defending artillery in the axe that is being assaulted, then the defender artillery fires, and you simply cross-reference the result with the stable, and you say if you are able to assign 0 or 1 or 2 cubes of damage to the opponent, with a negative modifier if the defending artillery is damaged. Then the infantry of the defender fires against the assaulting attackers. You have modifiers, -1 to the die roll for each 2 damage cubes of the defending infantry unit, and the results are 2 damage cubes, a damage cube, a morale check, nothing. Then you have the infantry morale check table, which the attacker must take whether the attacker received damage or received the morale result. So the morale result means that you're not taking damage, but you still have to perform a morale check. Damage also comes with an automatic morale check that as the attacker you have to take. Here it is for the attacker. You cross-reference the number of damage cubes that the check-in unit has. So the more damage the unit, the more likely it is that it will fail the morale check. You cross-reference that with a single die roll. There's a modifier, 1 shift to the left for elite units, and the result is that the attacking unit may have to retreat, so it cannot perform an assault, or it may simply be eliminated by the morale check. The attacking units, assaulting units that are still in the assaulted area, at this point they can attack. Infantry can attack, and you roll a die for each attacking infantry unit, results being 2 damages, 1 damage, disruption cubes for nothing. And finally, the defenders that have received damage or have received a disrupted result have to take a morale check themselves, similar to what happened to the previous one, just with different sets of modifiers. There are modifiers that are in the advantage of the attacker, depending on various situations. For example, if the defending unit is disrupted or of inferior quality. Other possible shifts that apply to the defender, in the advantage of the defender. For example, if the defender is on a hill or entrenched or elite, these are shifts to the right. So you compute all the possible shifts, you roll a die, and you cross-reference the modified column with the result to find, again, what the possible result is. Eliminated, retreated, disrupted, but multiple disruptions have no further effect. Or counterattack. This is a surprised attack. This is a surprised result in which a desperate group of defenders may manage to launch a surprise counterattack. If at the end of this 5-step sequence there are still units of both players in the same area, then you resolve another round of combat going through the same 5 steps. If at the end of the second round of combat there still are units of both players in the contested area, then all of the surviving defenders have to retreat to the area they came from. War game. Definitely a war game. Falls in my definition of war game without any doubt. As I'm playing this, I really have the sense that I'm playing a system that, even though in a highly abstract form, does manage to capture the historical specificity of the event depicted here, the Battle of Gettysburg. The game covers the 3 days of the battle, and it really manages to give you a sense of the overall flow of the story, from the initial attack from the Confederates, the sudden rushed response from the Union that is trying to reorganize itself to reach better defensive positions, to figure out where it is the best place to stand their ground and to defend against the opponent, how to mediate between the pressure of the opponent and, well, finding a good balance between delaying the opponents enough without being annihilated and at the same time allowing for other units in the rear to form strong defensive positions. As a Union, you're trying to survive until the next night. Night turns are special because there are special restrictions. You do not have assaults, and that is great for the Union because that is when the Union can use impulses to issue orders to build fortifications. The Union player here is the defender. The Union has to survive the attack on the first day, figure out a powerful line of defense, and then try to stay there and sit up there on those hills until the end of the third day. You definitely have the challenges that the historical commanders had. For the Confederate, it is indeed about not losing the momentum, trying to keep the Union player off balance before the Union player creates too strong a line of defense, because if that is the case, then things become very tough for the Union player. And there is quite a range of areas that the Union player has to defend. So the Union player will be forced to stretch quite a bit if the Confederate player tries to outflank and outmaneuver the Union player. But at the same time, actions take resources, and those precious orders are indeed pretty precious because they are limited. You do not have many. As a Confederate player, you have certain advantages when it comes to issuing orders. So, for example, you have the option from time to time of issuing double orders that allows you to perform combined actions that the Union player is not able to do. The Union player, because of the way in which the order discs are recycled, will be forced to pass from time to time. If the Union player takes too much time taking back the discs to make sure that those discs are saved up for the next day, then the Union player is also giving extra time to the Confederate player to perform actions. So it's a double-edged sword there. The Confederate player definitely has command advantages here, is more efficient, but the task of going up those hills against well-defended Union positions is pretty tough, as it very well should, given the theme. So the first day of the battle, you have some mobility. After that, the game slows down a little bit to a grind, but not that doesn't have to be a bad thing. I'm not saying this in a negative sense. It is true, you have two shifting lines of forces. The Confederates that are forming, reforming, and kind of like moving around the line, trying to figure out where it is the weakest point of the Union defense lines where they can try to punch through, where they can puncture that line and open up a way to advance through the hills, and the Union has to respond to that. And because of the of the stacking limits of the limit of units that you can have in an area, then the Union player sometimes will have to deal with traffic jams. You have some of your units that are weakened and you will like just to replace them with fresh units, but it is not that easy. It takes a lot of orders to maneuver some units out and put somebody back in there. In the meanwhile, maybe you're leaving an area or two under defended, and if the Confederate player times things well and manages to launch an attack as you are reorganizing those defenses, then of course things can get pretty tricky. The game is a pretty tough puzzle for the Confederate player, but things are not a no-brainer for the Union player. Yes, it is about defending. Yes, it is about building a wall of entrenchments and guns and people, but actually then manages to do so is not that easy. Very Clausewitzian, and this game everything is very simple, but the simplest thing is very difficult. I like that. I like the overall flow, and as you can see, I've been talking about how the theme is implemented here without even talking about the mechanics. Because even though the mechanics felt so abstract as I was learning them from the rulebook and then the first couple of times I was implementing them, then those mechanics do fade into the background quite easily as the game starts going, which is excellent, which is exactly what should happen when you have mechanics that mirror the theme well. They're highly abstract for sure, but they do give you somehow magically almost the sense that in fact these mechanics are simulating all of the problems and troubles and complexities of building a chain of command and making it to work. Of the fact that orders may be delayed, orders will reach a certain area later than you expected it, that you are trying to send orders in a direction and then the action shifts somewhere else, so the orders that you send in that area are pretty much useless. There are systems that, in order to simulate that, have very complex mechanics, like you have to write down an order, calculate the distance that is traveled by the people, by the person that you gave the order to, so the order is physically carried to a certain point. When it reaches a certain point, then you can activate it. Here with this idea of cubes and disks, you have a highly and apparently gamey way of handling this, and yet somehow thematically it works. It is actually a very economic, very elegant way of showing how there is often a gap between the way in which you would or issue your orders and you will like your orders to be carried out, and the over and ever changing reality of the battlefield, how you may be just a little behind issuing orders where it matters, and you're issuing orders and you have a lot of your chain of command devoted to issuing orders in areas that don't really matter much anymore. So I definitely like this. I was pretty skeptical about the command system at the beginning, and actually to me, after I played the game, this has become one of the things that I like the most, if not the thing that I like the most about this game. This is really what makes this game unique. It gives it a personality, makes it different from other games, and makes this game so interesting and challenging. Yes, you're playing it as a game through gamey mechanics, but these mechanics really go in the interest of the game experience. I definitely enjoyed the intersection between theme and mechanics here. So Gettysburg by Martin Wallace, very enjoyable game. Looks like a Euro game, plays a bit like a Eurogame, but does not feel like a Eurogame at all. This definitely is a great hybrid between Wargame and Eurogame, but at the core to me this still is a Wargame. And as a Wargame, it is also a very effective one because it is exciting, it is fun to play, it is full of challenges and meaningful decisions for both sides. On top of that, it is not too hard to teach new players, so it is also a game that you may find more people that are willing to play it with you than with other types of war games that are more specialized and have more rules. Gettysburg by Martin Wallace has been around for a while, but if you don't know it yet or you haven't played it yet, give it a try. I think this is a very fine game.